Здравствуйте, меня зовут Карина
Hello,
Шейфер.
my name is Karina Sheifer. I am a work of the language linguistics department of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The Evenki language is the language of the Evenki language, which is an indigenous people of the north, which has the widest distribution among all the indigenous peoples. And this is due to their nomadic nature. The Evenki people spread not only in the Far East, but Siberia, the Tomsk region, its eastern part up to the island of Sakhalin, in Taimyr and up to the border with China. But this territory does not have a compact nature. If we take a look at the green, at the brown, locations, Evenki are marked with the distance between their locations and settlements is pretty wide. By compact settlements, we intend their traditional settlements. And we as field researchers, we work directly in their settlements. The Evenki people inhabit 9 regions of Siberia and Far East. But one day, this territory was much more dense. This is the 17th century picture, and you see the green inhabited areas, which are traditionally belong to Evenki. They would inhabit river basins. And this distribution is fixed in the so-called tribute books in fur and other goods. You can see the Yakut settlements as well, but the situation is absolutely different. Out of the 38,000 Evenki people, only 4,000 speak the Evenki language, while the Yakut people are 450,000, and virtually all of them speak the Yakut language. This is a result of a transition of literature and prestige from Evenki to people to the Yakut people. As of the 17th century, such neighboring peoples like the Yati, the Selkup people, the Dolgan people, the Yakut people, even Russians, had a command of the Evenki language. The Dolgan people is a people that formed by the mid of the 19th century as an independent ethnic group. They also originate from the Evenki peoples. It belongs to the Manjur language group. Many of them I highlighted in white. Those in white don't have their own linguistic community, or the last living native speakers exist, which is the case of the Nanai language. The Evenki in the Nanai, as well as the Sibin language in China, these are the last Manchurian groups which has a certain degree of vitality. By vitality, we, as linguists, understand the degree of conservation of languages. These are very restricted communities. 4,000 people who reportedly speak the Evenki language are related to the 2007 census, but the reality is absolutely different. As a field linguist, jointly with my colleagues, I work in these settlements, referred to like compact settlement centers. And practically speaking, we assess that the actual number of native speakers do not exceed 2,000 people. As a rule, these are very elderly people over 60 years of age. If we compare this to other indigenous peoples like Hanti and others, they still have native speakers of 50 years of age and less. It's normal to find native speakers of Hunter language at the age of 50 and less. For the Evenki language, the average age of native speakers is over 60 years of age. And within the next 20 years, they will eventually become a dead language as their native speakers disease. The Evenki in China also have their languages there. These languages are pretty much similar to the Evenki languages, and they're starting to get their special status. This is also true for the Solon language. It is now referred to as a separate language. While Russia counts 38,000 Evenki people, while in China they amount to around 35,000. They normally inhabit the national region of Hushun. There is a national threat of this. They normally use their own writing in China. It shares the same roots with Mongolian writing used at present in Mongolia. Historically, they share some writing traits with Buddhist people like the Kalmyk Mongols, Buryat Mongols of Russia. And you can assess what this writing looks like. It's aligned vertically, it's a vertical writing. Some symbols were a little bit adjusted for the phonetic nature of the Evenki people in China. To some extent, we can see that degree of conservation of the Evenki language in China is better compared to Russia. What kind of writing do the Russian Evenki use? Like many other languages, this language implements the Latin writing. Russia establishes several regulations as to the writing, and Russian language is supposed to have a Cyrillic-based alphabet. We now refer to a 20th century writing tradition. It's even the second half of the 20th century. The Evenki language has some ambiguous traits of history. The Cyrillic alphabet used at present came into being in the 1930s, 1940s. In red are highlighted the letters not used to transcribe Evenki original words. The written tradition has been pretty long with the Latin-based alphabet, and namely, in 1926-1938, the Evenki language saw the language building era in the Far East in Siberia. This is when the Latin alphabet became the basis of all grammar books, textbooks, vocabularies. And this is when Latin alphabet-based textbooks appeared. This situation is not pretty common, but it became a norm. From my field experience, I can tell the following. As I talked to a native speaker of 75 years of age, it was 2 years ago, so you can calculate her child years, and she says that it is this specific Latin alphabet-based Evenki language was used by her parents. How did this happen? They attended their local school, and it's actually the traditional yurt, so-called chum. They exchanged notes written in Latin. We can see that this was regular practice, but by the 1938, the course towards cosmopolitanism underwent a change. This Latin writing was abolished for all peoples of Siberia and the far east of Russia. You can now take a look at a quote from Pushkin, and you can see that it's been exactly 100 years after the monument poem by Pushkin appeared in the Tungus language. Speaking of Pushkin's writing, these were the first pieces of Russian literature to be translated into the Evenki language. You can see now a second edition of Pushkin's famous piece. The full title reads The Tale of the Fisherman and the Fish. You can now see the dialect distribution areas. It is marked by a red dot. This is the Krasnodar region. This is the so-called national region of the Krasnodar Krai, or region, where compact Evenki settlements are located. We have to say that the literature norms of the Evenki language, that is the Evenki variant, used to be taught in various regions of Siberia and the Far East. All grammar books refer to this specific version of the language. Literature is still being published in this specific language version. But speaking of the present day native speakers of its different varieties, we can tell that the Podkamena Tunguska dialect doesn't have that many native speakers compared to the Eastern dialect. It is highlighted in indigo. And the three locations, these are compact Evenki settlements, which are distinguished by a very high vitality of language and its conservation. This is the Usnyusha village. This is the highest elevation point, the Kalar region in the Transbaikalia. It's presented by three major settlements famous for their deer farming. These are deer farmers' settlements. There are quite a lot of deer farmers who have a good command of their native language, and until present they have been able to successfully convey their national language to their descendants, while the Evenki language transmission came to a stop in a variety of different regions. Speaking of these locations, we refer to them as an oasis of the Evenki language. The Eastern dialect is pretty much different from the literature one, from the Western one. Textbooks are still published in the Western variant, which never became the dialect norm, which is one understood by all native speakers of all dialects. At the same time, there are 15 different dialects, and they are all marked by lines. Speaking of dialects, we refer to those becoming gradually extinct. The Sinsky dialect shapes an oasis. It is the westernmost area. It only has two full proper native speakers, those who can start a dialogue, tell their story in this language. Each of the dialects is broken down in 5 different types. So we have a total amount of around 50 different flavors of this language. And in Sakhalin, we have only a few of them who speak at different flavors and dialects. And this is related to families. The northern Buryat dialect also is a case in point. As we see this dialect map, it needs to be understood that each area is represented by its last native speakers. The statistics, starting from 1898, from the first all-imperial census, we have open data on the native speakers of the Evenki ethnic group. We can see that from the start of the 20th century, the number of people who identify themselves as Evenki people never came to zero, came down to zero. It never came to zero, actually. Indeed, there were discriminatory practices against the Evenki languages. Some people even tried to no longer identify themselves as Evenki people. They then identified themselves as Yakut people. This self-identification and national self-identification of the Evenki people is now strengthening. These are the data sources spanning the last 20 years. The number of native speakers decreases, and the figures reflected here are exaggerated. So it's only 2,000 people speaking the Evenki language. What led to this downfall? In the 40s, there was a policy in place to favor resettlements, and plenty of settlements were closed down in order not to establish supply routes. This led to challenging circumstances. It led to a mixture of different sub-dialects, and the same discriminatory practice took over. And the idea of that each Soviet citizen is supposed to be speaking Russian, this all led to the fact that the Evenki people no longer spoke Evenki among themselves. These settlements are normally mono-ethnic, populated by the Evenki people. And the Evenki people no longer spoke their mother tongue. Instead, they spoke Russian, in line with their state policy. The same applies to boarding schools for children. From my experience, I know that an elderly Evenki woman said that she attended a boarding school, even though her parents worked in the kolkhoz in the very same village. And the downfall of traditional livelihoods, such as deer farming, leads to a disruption of the language environment, and it is virtually non-existent from the 80s. There was a ban on using the language up to the 1970s, so a new generation of Evenki people came into being who could no longer speak Evenki. The Evenki language was taught in the 90s. The people actually got an official status of Evenki language educators, but they could no longer speak it properly. This is also associated with the mixing of various subdialects. There is also another major factor. Native speakers see no point in speaking this native language of theirs, gradually becoming extinct. Graphically speaking, it doesn't have multiple features. A specific feature of the writing are diacritic symbols. Osikta or sikta. So this length and quantity of vowel makes a difference. Let's see several examples. Osmi, scratch, osmi, clear the road. And it goes further. The distinctive feature of vowel quantity is differentiating. The Evenki is the language of fishermen, deer farmers, and hunters, and it has plenty of vocabulary on deer farming. There is a general term for deer and unavorka. This means if there is no deer, there will be no Evenki people. But we can clearly see that at present, the Evenki as a people are still alive. But even though they no longer practice deer farming, which is not the case for the Evenki languages. These are several examples. The deer nun depends on its age, up to 1 year, 1 year of age, 2 years of age, 3 years of age, 3 to 4, 5, etc. And the color of their fur. Bagdarin means white, Islan ash, and brown. The fertility is also a factor. A castrated deer has its proper name. There is a breakdown on their economic purpose. The riding deer is uchak. The sleigh one is usik. Now we see the root kalan, which actually means a cauldron. There is also a special name for a deer carrying a child, a special word for a holy deer and the one sacrificed to please the spirits. Different names based on antler types. Chuluke means single antler deer. Deer farming is not practiced across all the 9 regions. We saw the main habitat, which is triangular shaped, Yakutia and Transbaikalia. There are popular deer farms in the Krasnodar region as well. But overall, the Evenki people no longer practice deer farming, which significantly impacted their language. This proverb related to their survival as a nation and associated to deer specifically. Back then, the taiga deer farming was quite different from the tundra deer farming because you could not possibly have large groups of cattle grazing, large herds of deer grazing there. But the Evenki never experienced such a situation. The Evenki, it was a livelihood of the Evenki people as a means of transport to carry their due or chum, national housing. Their hinds were used for clothing. When all these units were replaced by present-day amenities, the need for deer farming was no longer popular. But the hunting vocabulary is still there. If you ask an Evenki people to say, yesterday my hunting was quite successful, they will clarify for sure which animal did you actually hunt, because the word hunting includes the root of the animal you hunt, like moose, squirrel, or sable. Minna means dog or ninnakin. At the same time, there is a special word for lume, a dog trained to hunt these different species of animals, squirrels, sables, mooses, and wild deers. The same applies to their hinds. The Evenki language has a very rich language formation systems. There are special suffixes for different shades of meaning. There is a special suffix which defines the residual material, like residual sewing material, the residues of food. There is a hoktoron special suffix for old items. A bracelet surrounds your wrist, so it has a special suffix for that. Nessa is a special suffix for the deceased. Mother-in-law, father-in-law, amiran, with the ran suffix. A master skillful at their craft is defined by the len suffix. Palan, a marksman hunter. Mni has a special suffix. Alagumni means teacher or educator. The verb system of the Evenki language is pretty much developed compared to the Russian language, which only has only 3 declinations, like the imperative, the indicative, and the probability. The Evenki language has 3 tenses, 3 future tenses. This language is on the verge of extinction. Therefore, not all the categories that used to exist in the past, like its various moods and found in textbooks, they're no longer perfectly reproduced by the present-day native speakers. We can say that native speakers of specific dialects use specific forms, but we may surmise that in the past all the 3 existed. We talked about the tenses, about the moods, and the aspect of verbs, defining the moment of action. It's more precise than a tense. There are special verbs defining the repetition of continuation and usual nature of action, start of an action, short period of action. Another distinctive feature is the us and we pronouns. There are 3 of them. It's the first person plural. We without us means bu. If I refer to my family, who is going to further continue their path as nomads? Meet us with you. Mut, us and you. It has a special pronoun. This defines the category of inclusivity and exclusivity, but it is no longer widely used by the present-day native speakers. Negation. It doesn't have a negative particle like in Russian. It implements another verb, an auxiliary verb. Ehi em sare ehinisare, and further on. The word is to know or not know. Modal verbs should, ought, had to. They also have negative forms. Albami, not to be able. Bami, not to want. From my field practice, I can tell that the albami verb is still used by the elderly population, while the other one is less frequent. Declension of names. There are 7 cases which describe location specifically. This is actually a locative, local case. Ure is a hill or a mountain. And here go all the cases, nominative, genitive, etc. Another special category of noun is the possession category, which can be alienable and inalienable. This, his, had, daily in. If we add the special suffix, that denotes alienable property. We also see another case, his had, which is in his possession for a short period. But how can this possibly be possible? Probably it's the head of his deer or the head of game he just hunted. Du stands for home or house. Dun, his house. And the second category is a temporary home. Counting. Not all native speakers implement this counting approach, but still the elderly and experts still use it. 5 days. Nadala means 7 days, week. Native speakers also reproduce the terms for the age of a person, number of chums, the number of livelihoods or houses. In Vanu means 3, 3 houses, 3 neighborhoods. The count for animals is much less frequent. Another rarely used phenomenon is the orientation in space. Speaking of up and down, there are 3 notions here. Vertical orientation is first. This is when you shoot upwards, throw an object vertically upwards. There is also direction along the river flow and along the hill. The most popular ones are the vertical one and the river flow, because the life cycle of the Evenki people is very closely tied to rivers. Rivers enable them to cover great distances in the less practicable taiga. Cardinal points, north, south, there is also a split depending on the groups. This may refer to a specific mountain or hill. In the Nerchinsk dialect of the Evenki language, popular in the Transbaikalia region, this case is related to migration from north to south. Therefore, they say back to say north and forth to say south. Another difficult to reproduce notions. These are temporal, time-related notions. Seasons in the Evenki language were pretty popular. There was the same notion. While the spring and fall had three notions: Nalkani, Ovilasani, Chegalasani. This determined different spring periods. It depends whether the ground is still covered with snow, how often you can bask in the sun. The same applies to fall. There's also connection to their traditional economy. At present, the Evenki people no longer reproduce the three names for autumn, the three names for spring. And I highlighted in bold type those terms that still used. The Evenki calendar one day used to be a very interesting one. This starts from joints of one hand up to the joints of the other hand, going through all the joints in between. And these are the various names of months. The top of your head, Ron, and the quantity of the vowel is a differentiating factor. The nature-related calendar. When some berries and blossom, when, for instance, larynx or larch is in bloom, when geese actually change their mold, changing their feathers. Interjections are pretty much used extensively. If you feel cold, you can say it in air. If you feel hot, you can say oko. Different emotions like amazement, feeling pity, amazement are also used. As we work as linguists, we often bother the native speakers. When we come again to work with them, we say damare, to mean that they're lazy, meaning that they're unhappy with seeing us again. Colors are pretty specific. Sinarin, depending on the dialect, defines yellow, brown, and dark green. Chularin stands for green and blue. But there are specific nations. Dicte is the blue color of swamp blueberry or whortleberry. Russian terms found in the Evenki. Try to guess the meaning of these words. Kelep is хлеб, bread. Porok stands for shooting powder. Pulat stands for scarf. Karchi stands for food, that is money. Burduk, sack, used for flour transportation. Priske stands for mine. In Yakutia, which is still a gold production center, one settlement is Priske, which stands for mining facilities. The Evenki traditionally had their family names. Some of the family names are still present today. The Evenki of the Irkutsk region, in some cases, have their last names presented on the left-hand side of the slide, vertically. But actually, there were far more of their names of this kind, over 100. What brings them together? The suffix gir. The gir suffix denotes the idea of a family. Amulet names: Verde, Popeye, Dokolok, Limp, Inixa, Dog's Hind, Kilteroy, Dry. This is a way to guard themselves from disease or danger. Traditional names are pretty poetic: Asimilan, Feminus, Yakchan, Gorgeous, Gatchan, Hawk-like, Garpancha stands for ray or arrow. But these are only traditional names. At present, these names are no longer used. However, there are two names that are still pretty much popular even today. A girl's name, Sinilga. Both words mean snow in the Evenki language. There are multiple notions of types of snow: hard-coated snow, melting snow, soft snow, and there is a special word for all snow types. Sinilga and Mana can be translated as snowy. Normally, this name is given to girls born during a snowfall. Timancha is a popular name for boys. Timancha means morning. For kids, baby boys born in the morning. What makes these names popular? Cinema. In 1970, Drug Timanchi, Timanchi Friend, was released. This is a movie on Timanchi. His father was a veterinary taking care of deers, and one day he brought a fox for Timancha. It's actually a wolf cub. This is not only a movie about the Evenki. It is the only movie shot in the Evenki language. Of course, the Evenki keep watching this movie over and over again. Ugrium Reka is another Soviet movie released in 1968. This title refers to an actual river, the Podkamene Tunguska, also known as Middle Tunguska. Sinilga is the name of a traditional magic practitioner. You can also watch the Zloy Duch Yambuya movie on the spirits of the taiga. Fedoseev studied the region, and his guide was Rukitkan. Rukitkan stands for little squirrel, squirrel cub. Another geologist started with the Far East 60 years prior to Fedoseev. His name is Arseniev. His guide was Dersu Uzala, gold on an eye, by ethnic origin, the Nanayan. Before the revolution, these languages were both referred to as the Tunguska region. Please check out my Tunguska blog. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learned quite a lot today about the Evenki language.